Time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go!
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition.
Here, here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod.
Bounty hunting is a complicated profession.
You want some soup?
Don't you agree?
Another happy landing.
All right, welcome back to Star Wars Escape Pod. I'm your host, Josh, and we have Reed and Blake joining us in the Escape Pod again today for Season 2, Episode 4 of Star Wars The Mandalorian. And you know what? We're going to introduce them right here. So how's it going, Reed and Blake? How's it going?
Hey. Not too much. Just finished watching the episode and
thought
it was pretty sweet. So happy to be here and talk about it.
Oh, yeah. It's good stuff. Actually, there's a lot to talk about because I took a lot of notes. So, but actually, before we get into the episode, I got to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that we had a very nice email come in, and this is from a dedicated listener of ours. Her name is Shelly. And, she said, hey guys, thanks for a great podcast. In fact, we're the first ever podcast that she's listened to, and it's easily her favorite. So that was super encouraging to hear.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah, super great stuff.
So there are fans. They do exist.
They do. They just don't send us a whole lot of emails.
The few, the brave.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if any of you guys are listening to this, then you're welcome to do the same. So thank you again, Shelly. We had a nice discussion about your fan theory, and I think we did send you an email reply. So anyone else looking to do the same, just send us your thoughts on whatever, anything you find that you want to take part in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you guys. If you hear us chatting about anything that you feel like went unsaid, or if you want to add anything or whatever, it would be great if you just sent an email then. So you can do that at theescapepod@outlook.com, and our Twitter feed is at SWEscapePodcast, and it's very easy to find. Just look for the same logo. And of course, there's always our voicemail option, which is also listed in the description of each of our episodes. But if you want to send one in by typing it in manually, it's speakpipe.com/Star Wars Escape Pod. You can start an easy recording there, and we will get that directed into our voicemail address. But just to recap on the fan theory that Shelly sent in as well was something, you guys saw it. It was something about something one of us said during the commentary tracks about the writers creating a variety of actions taken on behalf of the Resistance to paint them as virtuous, etc.
That's an interesting fan theory.
Yeah, I have to say the same. I'm trying to think of any argument against it, and I can't really say much because it does seem like they try to avoid making the Resistance look bad, right? So they don't want to use them to kill any of the positive characters. Because another example is they could have killed off Chewbacca when Rey used Force lighting, but they didn't do that either.
Exactly.
Actually,
And here's another thing is when it comes to those movies, I think the focus of the Resistance going out and other than taking down the First Order, they don't have any personal, it seems, vendetta to try and kill Kylo Ren or Snoke.
Not really, because if any of them were to have it, it would have been Rey. And you can argue that she had that through the first movie, but then they have the whole Force link to the second movie. That whole thing kind of gets abolished. So
they do. Sorry, I was
ahead,
just gonna say they do a really good job of painting the Resistance as the victim, basically, throughout most of the movies, because even though they in the end they have to take that shot at destroying, whether it's like the planet or whatever, Starkiller base or whatever else, like where they're never the ones pursuing like a particular entity like most of the time, whereas like the First Order is constantly like, oh, we got to find this person, or oh, we got to find like these resistance fighter, like we got to find them and hunt them down, and like, oh, concentrate all force, so like go after these guys. Or like in Force Awakens, like they come after the watering hole and stuff like that, or like the castle, Maz's castle, and that kind of thing. It's like, oh, we got to go here and get them and find them and beat them up. Whereas like the resistance, they're pretty much always running away. They're just like, get out of here, run.
I always just found that for a small fledgling resistance, that there wasn't a lot of emphasis on the fact that, hey, let's cut the head off the snake and then watch the rest of the machine just die, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like there could have been
cut the head off the Snoke. So he said, cut the head off the Snoke.
cut the head off of the Snoke, and unlike Hydra, one more takes its place. So
yeah, exactly. So true.
But yeah, I mean, it is strange that there's no emphasis put on how the resistance is out to kill either of them at all, like through the whole trilogy. It's more of a personal sort of thing for Rey and Ben Solo throughout the whole thing, whereas in Revenge of the Sith, like Anakin turns to the dark side, and Anakin's known the Jedi for years, and straight up Yoda's like, destroy the Sith, we must. and it's like,
it's really aggressive. That's very aggressive for Yoda, especially from what we know of him in the original trilogy.
Exactly. And Obi-Wan's just like, send me to kill the Emperor, I won't kill Anakin.
Did Yoda just speak in an absolute?
that
sounded to me like it was an absolute.
He spent too much time around that cave on Dagobah. He's breathed in some dark side toxins or something like that. I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe the Jedi were the ones corrupted. Maybe killing Sidious was a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the whole thing is up until the point where Yoda loses that fight, he realizes that he's failed, right?
Yeah.
And this is a conversation that I had extensively with Diego back when we were watching the Clone Wars, because in our Clone Wars Talk After series, there's a couple of Yoda arcs that happen here and there. And up until the point where Revenge of the Sith happens, and he realizes that he says, failed I have, when he gets into the speeder with Bail Organa. And he's not necessarily just thinking about that fight that he just had. I think what he's referring to is just the last like 15, 20 years of his life. And the fact that he was the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, and a Jedi Order that was responsible for protecting the Republic, and both of them are now just gone, right? Like he was the guy.
It's true.
He was the one responsible for
it was under his watch.
for leading. Exactly. It was under his watch.
Yeah, being duped into the war in the first place, right?
Yeah, exactly.
At that point, he would have realized that they've been played, because he finds out that Palpatine is the Emperor and is controlling both sides. So like the whole order got played, and it was all really came down to his decision.
That's a trap.
Yep. Yeah, and also even in the circumstance in Attack of the Clones, when him and Mace Windu, who I think Mace Windu's official title is like the Master of the Order or something. It's like one step next to Yoda as far as like priority and importance. But both of them are kind of discussing what Obi-Wan shares over the hologram, being that there's this clone army that's been created for the Republic, and then Yoda says to Mace Windu, like, blind we are if the creation of this clone army we could not see. And
good point.
And Mace Windu just looks at him, and he just shakes his head, and he's like, and then I think he says something about I think we should inform the Senate that our ability to use the Force is diminished. And then Yoda goes on to say, if inform the Senate is multiply, our adversaries will. And so his mentality,
they're faking it.
Yeah, and his mentality is like, no, we can't tell them this. Like, if we tell them, people are going to find out that we're vulnerable.
Yeah, we're showing.
And then
exactly.
the enemies are going to come out of the shadows, and we're going to be in like deep crap, because now there's going to be a lot of stuff to try and fix, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've already got a verge of civil war on the brink, happening.
Yeah.
So we don't have time to deal with that.
And not to dive too far into the EU, but a cause for that originally in the Plagueis books was Plagueis was pushing the overall force into more of a dark side, kind of like if it's like a balance, he's pushing it more towards the dark side, which then clouds the vision of the light side, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like as far as the balance of the force goes, like the more power that the dark side has, the more leverage it has over the light side, right? And that is actually something that they did kind of bring into canon a little bit, because when they're dealing with the whole Mortis thing in the Clone Wars, like there's that whole arc that takes place on Mortis. The father, who is this representative kind of chosen one figure in the middle between his two children, which the daughter represents the light and the son represents the dark. I think it was him or something who shared to Anakin that as long as his son, who represents the dark side, gains strength, so will the war escalate in their galaxy. So there's this sort of connection between like this representative figure of this particular side of the force and that side of the force, and whatever happens between these two people, that actually affects the rest of the galaxy at large, right? Mm-hmm. So in general, if the dark side gains strength, and however means necessary, like it just necessarily benefits those who use it. And so, you know, the dark side having never been stronger other than in Revenge of the Sith, at that very peak moment where all the Jedi are just wiped out, you know, that is like the pinnacle of, that is the revenge of the Sith, right? And it's essentially the return of the Sith, because at this point now they've come out on top and they've wiped out the whole Jedi Order. So anyway, we've come a long way from Kylo Ren, but anyway, we should probably get into Mandalorian here. But
the Mandalorian show.
Oh right, that's what we're gonna talk about.
I could talk Clone Wars forever, and I spent 40 episodes of this show just doing that. So you know, but it's been a while since we had Diego on chatting about Clone Wars, but it was it's fun. There's so much to talk about with Clone Wars because it just goes so deep, right? Mind you, there's like 7 seasons of a show to talk about, but whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of reach in there.
Yeah, so good episode, Mandalorian. I guess, I don't know, if just feel free to interrupt me if I bypass the moment you want to talk about, or if you have something evolving around the moment I'm referring to. But I'll just start off at the beginning. You know, the first thing I noticed was just this straight up Baby Groot comparison with Guardians of the Galaxy 2. You know, there was that moment where he's trying to teach the child how to rewire the ship, and then I was like, okay, yeah, he's like that wire goes there and that wire goes there, and it's like Rocket trying to teach Baby Groot. It's like, hey, push this button.
Yeah, you're right.
Push that button, but don't push this button. It's just like straight out of the same movie. Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. I was just amazed that he even recognized colors, because we thought like he was like almost like a newborn kind of.
Yeah, it's
brain capacity.
It's funny because like he's a baby, but he's 50 years old, and so it's like it's hard to. It's kind of interesting because I guess they can kind of get away with doing certain things with that, like the child that you wouldn't, like, you know, like a typical newborn baby, because the kid is like 50 years old, so there's got to be like something you know he's learned at this point. Like, I don't know how developmentally impinged he is, but
yeah, I think the best way to put it, I think, is the way that IG-11 unit put it in the first episode of the first season, which is that some species just age at different rates, right? So I guess if I were to compare it to like a human child, you know, we condense like the first kind of 3 years of their life into this time bracket of okay, they go from being a completely useless little person to being somewhat competent.
I'm mostly completely useless little person.
Well, you know, lovable, but like they don't do anything. Like you feed them and you change their diaper and whatever, right? But,
they learn to like color and stuff.
They learn to color, they learn to talk, very basic words. They learn to walk, maybe run, you know, and
crawl and waddle.
And they learn in that process. They learn what pain is and all this and that. And with the child, he's such a, I mean, if you were to think about it as a comparison, he's such a guarded figure, because not only is he the target of an assassination, but he's also incompetent of defending himself most of the time, unless of course that miracle happens and he's able to use the Force or whatever. But most of the time he's been very vulnerable. And
while we're touching on that, I don't know if we talked about it before, but that means Yoda's race, when they have a child, they have to take care of it, not just for like 18 years. They got like look after this thing for like 200 years, for
Brings
like 400
parents to a
years.
whole
What a
new level,
curse.
man.
Like, man,
Oh
that's
my
gotta be
God.
such a nightmare. Like, could you imagine
Oh,
having like a newborn child waking up every night for like 50 years?
Oh,
Bro,
dude,
that's
it's like,
brutal.
can you imagine let alone being one of those aliens or whatever, and say like, oh, don't worry, it's only the next 150 years of my life, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
that would suck.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, it's interesting. This episode in the beginning here, to me at least, pointed out the fact that this child, we're seeing a growth moment, and you know, in the sense that he's actually like helping him fix his chip. He's also able to comprehend colors now, and he's also experiencing what pain is like and learning from mistakes, right? So
And being sent to school.
Yeah. So like in this episode as well. So like big sort of character growth moments for that character, which is not something I really thought would happen, I guess, in my own kind of absent-minded way. Like I just didn't think that the focus would ever lend out to that character. I thought it was all centered around Mandalorian protecting this
just protecting
kid
him, and the kid being completely useless and always
yeah
Yeah, they really
trouble.
haven't used the kids' like force powers at all this season. Like pretty much nothing.
aside from
I
getting
think-
cookies.
Yeah, so
Yeah, which is
getting
funny.
cookies, that was the one moment.
But-
It's like, oh yeah, hey,
But
he can use.
let's be
a force
real.
belt, by
Like,
the
if
way.
any kid had force powers, of course you'd be robbing your parents' cookie jar.
Oh,
Like,
dude, yeah.
like
sure.
hands
Oh
down.
man, I'd be all over that, dude. Piggy
Oh, man.
bank would be busted wide open. Like heck yeah.
Yeah.
And I just love the look of absolute like anger and hatred on that kid's face when his cookies get taken. He's like refuses to share. No. Baby Yoda's like, all right, man. All right, I got this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that was just the first thing that stuck out to me. But I guess after that, Reed, you pointed out that the alien that shows up when the Razor Crest docks on was it Navarro?
Yeah.
That the alien there was actually out of squadrons. You said.
Yep. It's so in the like Rebel or Alliance campaign that the character takes part in, you're sort of leader or sergeant or squadron leader or whatever you want to call them. Her name is Gunny, and so she's kind of this like it was kind of hard to tell like with this alien in this episode. Like I don't know what the species is called, but it was kind of hard to tell if there was any cybernetics and stuff like that, because the character in Squadrons has a little bit of cybernetics and that kind of thing. But yeah, the character's name is Gunny, and it's kind of like she kind of like shepherds you through like parts of the game and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it took me a moment to recognize it because it's been a few weeks since I actually picked up the game, which I really need to just like. I'm okay. This upcoming weekend, I'm just committing to it. I'm gonna like binge the rest of the campaign, like for the whole day on Saturday or whatever. But I have had no time lately, so
But that
look
whole campaign, dude, that's not a face you're gonna forget because you're gonna see it a lot. And
well, exactly.
VR, you're gonna be up close and personal.
Yeah, and I have played in VR for the first mission or two. But yeah, I recognized it. I was like, how do I know that face? Like, it looks so familiar. So thank you for pointing that out. Star Wars Squadrons, everybody, new video game on the market. But yeah, first time we see a school in live action. We've seen Star Wars schools in the Clone Wars before, but on
Not
Mandalore.
Younglings,
but,
I guess.
Yeah, see, other than younglings, tactical clones.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but I mean, like students sitting at like desks with their holo pad or whatever out.
Yeah.
This is the real, like the first kind of classic, real world sort of depiction of a
School
classroom
setting. Yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was pretty cool, and it's it's just very, very interesting. I guess we just haven't seen that really.
Yeah, it's
too
kind
much.
of a classic like world building moment, like reminding us that there's like that's what kind of the thing I like about the Mandalorian show is that it isn't just about like the big shot heroes and stuff like that, like saving the galaxy, taking down like capital ships and Death Stars. It's like on like the human like relatable level, pretty much like. There's typical people like going about their daily stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, that's to add on to that. The school also represents just a growth for Navarro, which at one point, being in the first season, I mean, not only was it a pretty wretched place to be, but you had an imperial place, the Warner Herzog's like place of operation. And then you also had all those Mandalorians underground. Like it was not a nice place to hang out, you know.
Yeah, it was like a smuggler's den, right?
Yeah,
a wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it was basically just another Mos Eisley on a different planet, and now we're actually getting like school with filled with children, which is pretty crazy because it's like. I think to me, like that kind of represents like the circle of life within Star Wars is like, you know, chaos happens and ensues, and then like the healing begins, sort of thing, and you start to see the change and you know the evolution of like
the good people rebuilding and like
yeah exactly, the good people rebuilding. You start to see the evolution of like what I guess what these protagonists of the story that we watch throughout this whole saga, including all the movies and whatever. You start to see the positive outcomes of what they do and how it affects other people.
Yeah.
So like that whole fight scene in the first season, like that just ripped apart the whole town. You know, it was at a bit of a sacrifice, but I mean, now the Imperials are gone, all the Mandalorians are off world somewhere, and I mean, what's left is people rebuild. Yeah, people rebuild, and now it's actually
Carl Weathers comes in and takes over as the new mayor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he hires
Magistrate.
What's her face
Marshall
as the
Cara Dune.
Cara Dune as
she's like the Marshal. They called her. Yeah. We've seen two marshals this season, which I thought was interesting.
Yes, yeah. And Cobb Vanth and now Cara Dune. So very cool stuff.
Yeah, and poor Ponda Babar and his family there got all shot up with their squirrel pet.
Can you imagine if there was actually his family? Like, just a bunch of scumbags.
Poor walrus face.
That rat thing though was kind of creepy looking.
Oh man!
Oh dude, yeah, the freaking meerkat with the beady red eyes. Oh
yeah,
my god,
it's so twitchy and just like ratty, you know? Like
okay, I'm still baffled by the fact that if you look at the concept art at the end, it's breathing fire into one of the Ponda Babar's faces.
Oh yeah, so it was supposed to be a lava rat. Yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's funny.
Wow, I did not know
Crazy.
that.
Yeah, it's just like that one artwork, but it's like blowing flames at this alien.
I wonder if that's gonna be canon at some point. Maybe if it makes another appearance, we'll see it like take someone's face off or whatever.
You can use it as a weapon and just like squeeze it, and it'll like be like a flamethrower.
Yeah. Working on a sound effect for him now.
Yeah, I'll do a recording and send it in. Maybe maybe I'll get hired.
Yeah, send it in to Matthew Wood. Just be like your application to
I'll tweet it at him.
Yeah, to the sound business. So let me see. There was a speeder that popped up a lot like Luke's, which was pretty cool because once again, just another reminder, we're in the Star Wars universe, and it's just a visual aesthetic that just agrees with me as far as design language.
They need to keep doing stuff like that. I think that's actually one of the things people didn't like about the prequels, is everything looked super different. And again with the sequels, it's like nothing's consistent every 30 years, which is annoying.
Yeah, although with the prequels, it's set, you know, quite. Well, I mean, to be fair, the sequels, I guess, are set quite far forward. But the prequels have this, like, depending on what planet you are. If it's a completely different planet that we've never seen before, then it makes sense. But what I like about what the prequels did is, even though stuff did look very different, like the Naboo N1 starfighters, for example, it did feel very consistent within their ecosystem. So like all the ships are like that, like the whole visual aesthetic of their language looks like that, like all the characters, like the rounded characters and everything, and that flows into like the buildings as well, like the roofs, like the domes on the buildings look like the front of their ships, like it was just, and all the chrome and everything, it's very luxurious, just like the way that their some of their higher end lifestyle is. And you know, if you're not super rich and wealthy, then you're still living in a pretty nice place. Like, so it's that's what I liked about it, is that there's a lot of like good, solid world building that just felt consistent in that own little place, right? I think some things that disagree with me about the sequels is like there's this random thing that just doesn't make sense in the place that it is, I guess, right? But I don't know. I mean, one of these speeders popping up, it's a welcome design, because it's like it's an old trashy planet, a bit like Tatooine. You might get some old speeders showing up that you haven't seen before.
It makes
for a
sense,
while.
because I mean, I bet the Luke speeder was old when he had it, right? So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And those speeders are all like speeders that would have been like brand new in like the prequel era, right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it could have been those speeders that we saw outside of Dex's diner, like flying along the street. A very, very brief scene there, but those fast little cars that you saw. Yeah, so I don't know. Could have been like one of those.
It's very specific.
Oh yeah. It's the only time that I think we see like a speeder like that. That's the thing.
Like land speeder.
Yeah, aside from in Tatooine, where Qui-Gon's walking through the streets of Mos Espa, I think that's like the only time that we see speeders like that. Was on that one shot.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind other than that. Well, we see there's the one speeder with a giant cannon on the back on Naboo. In the battle.
Oh, yeah, the flash speeder. Yeah, that's true.
And
we
there's
got
like
something like that.
When they meet up or whatever before that part, there's like a bunch of speeders that come in from the towns with like, I don't know, I don't remember.
Yeah, that's the one thing about the prequel films, is that they didn't necessarily focus in on this sort of wretched kind of hive and villainy sort of world, right?
Which is a real shame, because I think that's part of what people really liked about the original trilogy. It was very
dystopian. Totally, and that's I think where Clone Wars comes in. It does a great job because
it's right in there.
Even though it takes place in that era, and the film's focused on a select few amount of characters on in other places where that wouldn't have been a thing. The Clone Wars, it fills that hole and kind of tells stories in that environment and in the lower levels of Coruscant and with bounty hunters. Like we get full arcs with just bounty hunters, and it's like it does a really good job at making that a reality, I guess.
Yeah, the prequels kind of just like make reference to stuff sometimes. Like when I think about like the Clone Wars in general, it's like, oh yeah, like this planet's under siege, or this place is blockaded and the population is starving, and it's just kind of like they make a mention of it, but we don't really get to see that in like the actual prequel movies and stuff like that. We don't see that kind of human suffering from like the rest of the population, because it's just, the story is just kind of following the heroes.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
that's true.
You really get to see like how the war is affecting other people.
Because it's really just honed in on the main characters, but if a lot of that is filled in through the Clone Wars, a lot of it.
Yeah, a lot of it is for sure. So we got our favorite scumbag alien back, who is out for a buck. We find that's what he was.
Yeah, I was so surprised to see him again. To be honest, I thought he'd be done. Like we'd never see him again.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd see him either. I was kind of like, well, when they had the recap, I was kind of like, oh, are they really going to bring that guy back? And then he was back. So I was like, okay, like, what are they going to do with him? And it's like, oh, he's basically like a cheating bookie or whatever that tried to dip with a bunch of money, and now he's suffering the consequences.
And he fits that character like so well, because throughout the whole episode he's just so lazy.
Lazy, miserable, doesn't want to do anything.
Always complaining. Like he's just he's just out for himself.
This is rated for plumbing. Like
he's just out for himself.
He's an indentured servant that doesn't want to work.
Yeah, exactly. And then he goes on to complain about the fact that there's no guardrail on a lot of the Imperial.
Yeah, like
that was great.
It was very football. I like that.
That's a good moment. Oh man,
I love that moment because nobody ever says anything about it. Here's the weird thing about most of the films is that they wouldn't take the time in the script to do something like that, right?
No.
but as fans, it's like we watch it and practically
everyone says it.
Why isn't there like a railing or something? Because like
it's always over this pit of like infinite distance, where just no matter what, you're dead.
Oh yeah,
any
safety. Yeah, work safe is just not there. Work safe PC don't exist.
Work safe Empire.
Yeah. Empire. They just have the lowest, most trash budget in the world. It's like a room of like 5 guys that are like just print out a couple pamphlets once in a while, like not even holocrons.
You know, like those 90s business videos, or like they record their own safety videos and everyone has to do the training.
It's on like a little tape. Yeah.
Someone needs to do an Empire video like that. That'd be hilarious.
Oh man, like I mean, that would be amazing. Like, because I know that they've come up with some pretty good like propaganda messages that they've played in the background here and there in Star Wars Rebels, and had the posters that they did up, and then those showed up in Solo as well. But yeah, to do like an Imperial like work safe video, that would be fantastic.
Right?
Like, I would love to see that.
That is ripe for
just another day as a stormtrooper.
Just don't step near the edge.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, that's the thing. It's like the Empire's just too cheap to like bother putting a railing up.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, and it reminds me of
give an actual excuse, because everyone just assumes it's budget cuts, and that's what my guess it is. But have they ever said any reason? It just looks menacing.
No, I think it all dates back to when Ben Kenobi's sneaking around the Death Star.
Yeah,
and he's got to turn off the tractor beam. Yeah. The old man is just hanging off this like ledge just to click a few buttons. I'm like, who's the guy that has to do that? Like that job.
Actually, I wonder if they just get a lot of droids to do that stuff. To be honest, like. Could you imagine being like on the Death Star, one of those like Imperial like naval troopers with that absolutely whack helmet, trying to like move around and like see what you're doing, and you can't even look down, like can't even turn your head around without like smacking your head, like you're not.
Oh man, it'd be a nightmare. Man.
I mean, like they can make a thermal exhaust port 2 meters wide, but they can't make their walkways 2 meters wide. Like, like it's like whatever.
Oh man.
Anyway, Empire's not the best employer, that's for sure. So we got a really crazy, a little crazy like Easter egg that this is revealed to be the reason why there's an Imperial base here in the first place, and this sort of may or may not end up connecting to some of the books and stuff that have come out over the last couple of years. But the large fan theory out there is that those Bacta tanks have
Snokes.
Have Snokes in them, basically.
Yeah, that was my first thought, was those are like Snokes in there. They're in the process of figuring out how to create or clone some sort of force-wielding entity.
Yeah.
And that would eventually lead into Snoke. So it'd be like the same kind of like cylinders or tanks that we see the unprocessed Snokes next to the Emperor on planet.
And here's the thing, because at this point, see, I imagine that this has not necessarily been absolutely confirmed, but this is essentially what I imagine the end of Return of the Jedi to be, now that movie has changed due to Rise of Skywalker. But when the Emperor is tossed down the hole and that big huge like beam of light comes up and whatever, is that's kind of like his soul, I guess, being like transferred into his body on Exegol, which I'm assuming is already made, right?
That's what I thought too, because they're all. Is his soul just in limbo while they create it? Like, I assumed it was already ready to go.
That's just it. I think that's my theory, at least, is that it would be ready to go, and that this is all part of his grand plan. Is that he then now, which obviously up until like 2 years before that movie came out, that was not the plan at all. But thanks to J.J. Abrams, we have to try and think this way, all right? So like J.J. is saying this was his plan all along. It's like, all right, whatever. So that being said, that means that there's probably a body on Exegol right now that he's currently living in on his mechanical arm thing, and he's got the very beginning tangents of the First Order trying to start something up here, because one of those officers referred to that spy that placed a tracking beacon on the Razor Crest near the end of the episode. She referred to that guy as being someone who would be rewarded in the new era.
Yeah, which definitely was alluding to the First Order.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure. Yeah.
Well, so for me, like, I didn't really right away assume that those like attempted clones or whatever would be like Obsidious or anything like that, because at that point I was kind of like, all right, it's already kind of late to the party, because like we know that technically Sidious would have already been cloned if he's, you know, like alive on Hexacle and all that jazz. But like it reminded me of like maybe not the most canon video game in the world, the Force Unleashed 2 or whatever, because that was kind of a main theme of that video game, was that
he was a clone. Yeah,
he was a clone and stuff like that, and then you fight like clones of yourself at one point in the game. But it kind of just like reminded me of like, or it helped me to understand, I guess, like, oh, okay, so this is kind of what they're doing. Like they're trying to like clone like Force users type of thing that they can thrall to their to the Empire's will and stuff like that.
I don't know if it previous to that game, I don't know if it was ever in EU canon or not, but it was kind of always alluded to that you couldn't clone Force users. Like if you cloned them, they just wouldn't be Force sensitive.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that something at least of an issue that they're actually running into with well, I mean, Palpatine in Episode 9, obviously he managed to make it work, but I think that might be something in regards to the fact that they can't get this to work because the M count isn't high enough, and that's obviously pointing towards the midi-chlorian count. Yeah. They
just didn't want to use that word, M count.
I think either that. Well, see, now this is Dave Filoni, so like I don't think that they were necessarily afraid to use the word. More or less that they were trying to make a slang word for it, so that it not only takes the pressure off of just the word midi-chlorian, but also kind of makes it seem as if, hey, this doctor, not only is he a non-Jedi person that knows about these midi-chlorians, knows what he's talking about, but it's being used in a very like doctoral sort of professional manner of speaking. It's like, hey, his M count is low, or like his red blood cell count is low, you know, like anything like that. So you know, I can
it's
get on board
also
with the M count.
Interesting then to think about the fact that they were doing like blood transfusions, so that would then in theory increase your metachlorian count. So
yeah, so the way that it works, at least basically the way that Qui-Gon explains it all the way in the Phantom Menace, is that the midi-chlorians are these microscopic life forms that live in your blood, I guess, on your cells, right? And they communicate with the Force and all that, and it's like I think what they're trying to do is essentially extract those midi-chlorians from the blood and port them into this volunteer. And he talks about this person who is a volunteer and refers to this volunteer by no name at all. He just refers to them as the volunteer. Who the volunteer is, no idea. That's a mystery to me. And I don't know if it has something to do with the bodies in the tanks, but if there is a volunteer of some kind, if this isn't Snoke at all, and that being said, maybe Snoke is a failed replication of somebody who isn't Snoke at all, and they were trying to clone that person and it didn't work out. But if Snoke is out of the picture right now and this is something new entirely, who do you guys think the volunteer would be? Because this is obviously a force-wielding person.
Well, like, so is it volunteer or volunteers plural?
Volunteer.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Like so I guess when I listened to it, I kind of like assumed like volunteers plural, because like when I was watching it, my overall speculation was that because the Empire always likes to like simplify and go kind of for quantity over like quality necessarily. And so I was kind of like, oh, like they're trying to like manufacture like force wielding people at this point, right? And trying to like replicate the process so they can just make more and more of them over and over and over again. Because like kind of at the end of the episode, we sort of see what looks to be like, I don't know if they were like supposed to be like death troopers or some kind of new imperial trooper that we haven't seen before and stuff like that. So I was like,
it looks more like droids.
So
yeah, maybe.
I'll actually get into that, but yeah, what was that about those?
Yeah, but I just was like, oh, maybe they're trying to like basically like create some sort of like force using like super soldier or whatever, and try to like industrialize that and make as many of them as possible. But I mean, I'm probably wrong. That was just at the time, because like I said, I kind of just like heard it volunteers plural, and so I just assumed these are just like a bunch of imperial troopers of some sort that are like, hey, yeah, make me a super soldier. But I guess if there's like one singular volunteer, like, yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea that perhaps they're trying to, with those bodies in the tanks, if it's not Snoke at all, because
which feels like the most obvious answer, honestly.
If it's not Snoke, or if it is Snoke,
would be Snoke.
Yeah, because
especially
the music, obviously, the music is dark and ominous and feels exactly like the same music that Palpatine has when he's talking to Anakin in the opera, or when Kylo Ren is talking to Snoke in his throne room. It's the exact same song. So I feel like if it isn't Snoke, because like let's just assume that it is, but for the sake of speculation, let's say that it's something new entirely. There's this unknown volunteer person or whatever. Like it makes me think like who this person is. Like I'm super curious, because
do you think they're already in canon somewhere, or is it someone new? I would have leaned towards somebody new.
I would lean to that, but it makes me wonder if this volunteer is somebody that maybe we've seen before. Like, is this a person that because this is obviously a person that's alive, because they said something about how the volunteer would die if...
I got it! I know who it is.
Who's that?
It's Broom Boy.
Broom Boy?
It's got to be Broom Boy.
I mean, Broom Boy is not even alive yet, but...
yeah, because they're creating him right now.
They're creating him. I got you.
For real, though, dude. Oh my
solved.
God.
Mystery solved.
Yeah, man.
I think
your
the
mom and dad.
volunteer...
Oh, I was thrown in a tank.
The volunteer could very likely be possibly an inquisitor that just never died. That was maybe perhaps...
Do you think they're already force sensitive and they're trying to become more powerful?
I think that might be a likely outcome.
Okay, because to me, it seemed, and this is just off my speculation and my intuition, it seems more like they were trying to take someone who's not force sensitive and make them force sensitive. So it'd be somebody who's not force sensitive at all. Maybe it could be like a Knight of Ren or something.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it boggles my mind to think that this is now where the show is kind of headed, and I got super excited when I saw that tank. And here's the thing, like I don't even like those movies, like the sequel films, right? But what this show is trying to do is trying to
bridge the gap,
right? And I appreciate that, even though I just can't get on board with the sequels at all. Like they just disagree with me in every way, shape, and form. But the way that this story is progressing, I can appreciate that this is what they're trying to do is make those movies make more sense and give them relevance. Like I'm on board with that, because I mean we have them, right? Like they're out there. They exist.
Yeah, I mean they're these third party shows. I say that because they're not like that in like Clone Wars, not an actual theatrical movie. They're almost there to like fill in the parts of the movies that kind of were a little lackluster.
Yeah, and help
Clone Wars,
audiences, I guess, understand those films better.
Exactly. So like Clone Wars filled in a lot of blanks for the prequel movies that were just left feeling kind of rough edged, or like didn't entirely make sense, or just left people confused. They really filled in a lot of that gap, and then you could say that this then is trying to actually bridge the gap of how First Order came to be and everything. That could be a potential direction they're going to go. We don't actually know that yet, but
yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised if they decided to do that, because the only show we have pre-sequel movies right now is the kids animated show, right?
Yeah, it's just Star Wars Rebels and
Star Wars Resistance.
And sorry, you mean the other one. Yeah, it's just Star Wars Resistance, which
it's pretty much right in the era of First Order. So we don't have anything pre-First Order, post-Jedi.
No, like there's very few that I think part of the first, actually it's most of the first season takes place before The Force Awakens, and then the rest of the first season / season 2 covers The Force Awakens in a different part of the space or whatever.
Oh, okay. I thought it was completely before.
Yeah, and then it actually goes all the way up until like the end of The Last Jedi sort of thing. So like the second season kind of bridges that gap. So the first season, it starts before those films, and by the end of the show, you are midway through through that trilogy, so to say. So it does actually fill in a bit of the political stuff in a very, very basic way.
Yeah, I mean, it is like a young preteen show. So.
Yeah, and yeah, whereas Clone Wars got even way deeper into the politics, whereas this show is even for like a younger audience. So it was very kind of lackluster in some areas, but I appreciated it for some things, and like, you know, it wasn't terrible. It's easily my least favorite animated show that's got put out so far, but it wasn't. It took me a bit to get on board, but it wasn't garbage once I accepted it for what it was.
Hold on, okay. Something just dawned on me here that might make you kind of happy, Josh. So let's say theoretically that they are creating the thing entirely from like a cloning system, not a previous person, but they're creating Snoke.
Right.
And if they're using the child's blood, and let's say the child's blood obviously will have a high metachlorine count because it's the same race as Yoda. Now, this is a part that you're going to be happy about. So that means that Snoke will be an extremely powerful Force user because you have the same metachlorine count as Yoda, and Yoda did not have a higher metachlorine count than Anakin. So that means Anakin would still be the most powerful Force user ever.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
that is true.
I could see them doing something like that. Actually, would make a lot of sense because it's not going to be this new thing that's more powerful than Anakin that just kind of came out of nowhere. Because I know that was something that really chided you pretty badly, and it's still. I think it fixes that problem because a lot of people were left to assume that, right? Because that's what they kind of alluded to in the sequels, and that seems like a Dave Filoni thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I like where they're going with the show. Honestly, like there's a lot of good hooks that they're driving in at the right spot, and it's, I mean, when they brought in the child to begin with, it's like, okay, we got this super powerful like 50-year-old baby, and like, where's this going, right? Like it's like, okay, like end goal, return it to its kind, or the Jedi to look after, whatever, right? Like, but that's a very straightforward objective to achieve, and then, you know, to have just all these interruptions that take place kind of every week to week, it's like it really becomes that kind of, you know, Sunday morning cartoon serialized sort of plot, you know, where it's like you have a season and it's like the beginning of the season they're on the mission, every episode after that it's like feels either filler or like a blockage towards that objective, and then by the end of the season they accomplish their goal, done, right?
And do you like 20 something episodes to get there.
Yeah, exactly. So this, though, to me, this feels like it's like, all right, I can get on board with this because now it's more than just about this kid. Like, now we're taking these characters that a lot of people who weren't that familiar with this show, who said to me personally, oh, I enjoy The Mandalorian and not so much the films because The Mandalorian sort of exists on its own. And I'm like, dude, no, it doesn't. Like this show is. Yeah,
I remember you talking to specifically a coworker we worked with about this exact thing.
Yeah, it's a friend of ours. And it's like, man, like I can see where you're going with this, but at the same time, it's like we're 8 episodes into a show with the first season. It's like, you know, I guarantee you, you know, as soon down the road, like you'll get a better sense of, and this is actually some speculation that I had before this season started, was that this season was going to be the season to root this show in the timeline a lot better, to help people kind of avoid calling the child Baby Yoda and confusing a lot of people who actually think it's a prequel show when it's not, right?
Yeah, so many people think that actually is Yoda.
Yeah, and it's like, as long as they know, here's the thing, as long as people know that like this show takes place after the George Lucas saga, which, you know, 1 through 6,
yeah,
I'm fine with that. Like, you know, call it Baby Yoda all you like. But the issue I have is that it's misleading people as to like what this whole show is about, right? So that's what I take issue with the whole like Baby Yoda name.
It's true. It is more confusing to the normies.
Yeah, because then it's just affecting like the plot and everything, right? Because then it's like well, the whole backstory of this plot has now changed because, like, you know, what empire are they talking about then, or, you know, this and that and all these things. It's like no, this show takes place here, and now we have a lot more relevance to the movies, and I love this like hook to the next movies because it's like it's just rooting the show further in to that timeline, to make more sense, I guess, you know, from a chronological point of view. If you were to go through the whole series, it's like, you know, if you didn't watch this show, there won't be things that make sense in the next couple films, right? And so whenever I recommend anybody who hasn't seen Star Wars before, I always say watch the films in a chronological order, because there's things about watching them that way that will make sense as you go along. And if you have the time to throw in the animated shows, that's even better, because now you know who Sifo Dyas is. Now you know who.
It fills in a lot of throwaway names and events, right?
Yeah, and oh look, now you know that Maul comes back and survives and gets away, and that's why he pops up in Solo, and now you know what happens to him in Rebels, and you know there's all these things that make sense more if you just watch them in order. And it wasn't as simple, I guess, when we only had the 6 movies and maybe 1 animated show. It was a lot easier for, I guess, generally speaking, anybody to kind of recommend, oh, just watch them in release order, or, you know, watch them in chronological order. There's almost no decision-making process now. It's like, you know, the best way to get the story is chronologically.
Because there is so much, you're almost forced to do it. Because before the sequels came out, I remember a lot of people were big advocates of the machete order.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't really work anymore if you include any of the spin-off movies or even the sequels. So,
yeah, exactly.
You could argue the machete order would be just the story of Darth Vader. Mm-hmm. And it works for that. But now there's a lot of like extra material that makes it very clunky.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, Reed, what order are you kind of an advocate for prior to all this extra stuff that's now come out?
What do you mean, like
before Disney acquisition, we just had the George Lucas 6 films and the animated Clone Wars series. If you were to recommend to anybody just to watch Star Wars who'd never seen Star Wars before, would you sit them down and watch The Phantom Menace, or would you sit them down and watch A New Hope?
Man, so I've always been like an OG film fan. So like I start them with the original trilogy and then go back and prequel it up. And then after the prequels, I guess I get them to watch Rogue One as well. And then like it kind of comes full loop. And then they're like, oh man, right? Like, so cool. Or at least that's kind of like when I watch the films and stuff like that. I mean, I had a great time when we watched the films, like starting from Phantom Menace and stuff like that, because that's kind of like how everything like falls together. But at the same time, like I think it's because like I've already watched all the movies that I'm like, oh yeah, like there's so many things that like they allude to in the original trilogy that they bring out in the like the prequels and stuff like that that are kind of like aha moments, and so it's like it makes it more rewarding for me, I think, like when I watch it. But so like now, like when I watch it, I don't have a problem with watching like the prequels first, because I'm like, because I have seen the movies enough times that
Right.
I kind
Yeah.
of know what happens and stuff like that. But like I yeah, like the original trilogy is like, for me, it's just like, it's classic. And so I enjoy watching, and I think too, like part of it is that the original trilogy too is quite old. Like this is quite a bit older even than the prequels, which are kind of old at this point
Yeah.
too. And so I think it's harder to make someone like watch the prequels and then go to the trilogy, which has like that very cool but still like older, like classic effects, and like practical effects and stuff like that. And then if like for whatever reason they want to watch the new movies, then it's like kind of a shock back into mostly CG and stuff like that. So it's, yeah,
Yeah.
kind of always favored the original movies, because that's kind of like what I grew up with. Like, because when I was a kid, like the only movie that was of the prequels that was out at that point was the Phantom Menace, and so
Yeah.
all the other original trilogy were already out though. So it wasn't until like
Right.
Clone Wars came out when we were kids, which I don't think I saw Clone Wars in theaters. I think I rented it on VHS or something like that a few times. And
VHS.
then,
Really? Was Clone Wars actually on VHS?
Yeah, I'm pretty
In
sure, man.
2008.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I
then
can't believe it. I thought they were all gone by 2008.
I think so. I think it was, I don't know, but like when Revenge of the Sith I saw in theater, and that one
Yeah.
was for sure not VHS or whatever. But
That
like
that one was, yeah, that was 2005. I definitely remember them actually releasing a VHS on purpose, because all the previous ones had a VHS, and so
Yes.
anybody
They
who
wanted the
bought-
set.
yeah, so
they wanted the set. Yeah. So it was one of the only new VHSs that you could buy at that
Yeah.
point. There was like no others in store though.
yeah, but so for me, like, so my dad had all the Star Wars movies, so he had Phantom Menace on VHS, and then he had the other three like special edition movies on VHS as well, I think, or like it was that, or like I knew like friends and stuff that did. So it was always like, for me, like the original trilogy was just like my favorite ones, because it was kind of like I always really hated I've always kind of really hated cliffhangers. Like that's why I have a hard time watching TV shows, because I hate being kind of like left there waiting for like the next episode type of thing.
That's what those shows run on, man.
I mean,
Yeah,
these
exactly.
Days,
I hate
you gotta
that.
wait
I just
like
can't
a
stand
year.
it. Like that's why I don't mind like binge watching stuff, or like, I mean, Mandalorian, I'm willing to suffer through it, but like
Yeah, bad at it too.
I
Eating
just
weekly.
I have to binge watch TV shows, because I just hate so much that they make me like sit and wait, and then like I'm sitting like watching commercials for half the thing too. It drives me nuts. But
We
I
live
digress.
in a different world now where you can do that, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
I've always just, I mean, I find it like a luxury thing still to be able to binge anything at all, because,
Yeah.
I mean, we all come out of a time where TV existed without having any streaming services. So, not only did my family just not watch TV because we didn't pay for cable, never have, but if there was a show or whatever, in my older age, I was able to find ways to watch it online, right? But I mean, I still had to wait week to week to get the next episode of whatever it was I was watching, Big Bang Theory or otherwise. I still had to wait for that next episode. But yeah, these days we're super lucky to have these like just massive binge drops, that they do. It's nice.
But yeah, so I've always kind of, like, because at that time, right, like Phantom Menace, like to me, I was so young, like as a like I didn't understand like the scope of it or anything. To me, it was just like, cool, a Star Wars movie, but it was just kind of standalone at that point. Like, we didn't get Clone Wars or Revenge of the Sith yet. So yeah, the original trilogy was kind of always like where it was for me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think like going back to like I was saying, like I think it's hard to make people like go from watching the prequels to watching the original trilogy, because it's because of the time difference. Like the effects are just such a big difference in the effects.
Yeah, I guess for first-time viewers, it's a bit of a rough transition going. If you do watch them chronologically, that is, it's a bit of a rough transition going from those prequels into these films that all of a sudden were, were going back like 40 years or whatever. But that's why I love Rogue One quite a bit, because it's a movie that not only bridges that gap so perfectly, but I mean, story-wise, that you get kind of, if you watch that and A New Hope back to back, you just get projectiled into this old movie, having the hype of that new movie behind you, and only, within 20 minutes or whatever of seeing Vader just rip up the bunch of rebels in a hallway, that it's like you have this pre-existing sort of idea of these characters that normally I guess you wouldn't have if you watch those ones first, because Vader just shows up and he's like, and by today's standards of watching a kid's movie, kids are so desensitized, right? Vader shows up, it's like, oh, it's a dude in a dark helmet. And
that's so much more,
back
right?
in 40 years ago, like, I mean, I'm sure our avid listener, Shelly can probably agree with us on this, but Vader was probably this terrifying dude, like, back then, right? Like I mean, you had this kid's movie that was designed for younger viewers ish, and he shows up, and it's the most terrifying thing you probably ever seen back then.
He was designed to look scary, right? I mean, he's like, he's got like a robot skeleton, like skull for a face, right?
Yeah. And now by today's standards, you get villains of the same level of intimidation, like Thanos or whatever, and they're just so lifelike, right? Yeah. And Vader is just this very robotic,
mechanical.
And I mean, he's scary, but I mean, what have we actually seen him done? Not much, right? So for me, it's just like a personal preference, I guess. But I like watching A New Hope back to back with Rogue One on purpose, because I like having that sort of mental image of like, that's who that guy is, right? And then you go into the next movie where he's choking someone to death, which is it's pretty intimidating. But the fight with Obi-Wan's nothing special.
Yeah,
so,
and I think I think to me too, though, kind of I guess I'm kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit, like, for the way that I would get someone to watch the movies, because like to me, Rogue One is, to me, like the epitome of like a fan film, pretty much. Like it was made to like for fans, like fans can appreciate that movie like no one else can. Like if you're just like watching the movies in chronological order and stuff like that, it's still like, they're still awesome movies, but there's no way you're gonna appreciate like the things happening in Rogue One the way that we can, right? Like I remember being in the theater watching Rogue One, I was like, holy crap, like this is so freaking awesome, man. Like those moments they had with Vader were just so well done, because it wasn't
I had the biggest smile on my face when I watched it.
And that's exactly it though, right? Whereas like someone else, it's just like, whoa, like it's still a super cool, menacing character, but they're not gonna like appreciate it to the same level that we are.
It wasn't that like 40 years of waiting to see the power of Darth Vader.
Exactly right. So it's just, there's so much more gravitas, and that's kind of where like I think they failed so much with the sequels and stuff, is that they didn't do a very good job of making them fan films, excuse me.
I think they were more after the nostalgia over fan servicing, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. But and actually I had the conversation at some point on this show about the difference between hitting that nostalgia button and just doing something to pay service to fans. And there's that in between, which does both. But I think Force Awakens is one of those movies that just smashes that nostalgia button so hard that it's like we got nothing new out of that movie.
They smashed it so hard they broke it, and then they spent the last two movies trying to put it back together, and it didn't work. Totally, absolutely. Okay, so there's one more thing I want to cover in this Mandalorian episode, which was what you brought up, which was those suits in the room. Yes. My genuine theory, and this is something that other people I've noticed online have been speculating on, is that they're actually dark troopers. So
like from the game?
So if anyone is familiar with Galactic Battlegrounds or Star Wars Dark Forces, which is a fairly old game, even Star Wars Galaxies,
I'm
Empire
of a
at War,
like,
Jedi Knight, Mysteries of the Sith, like
They were
yes.
around quite a lot, but they've never been officially canonized since
Sorry.
everything was wiped out.
So
That's right. Yeah.
sorry, the Dark Trooper that I know is the one from Star Wars Battlefront 2 that had like an E11 blaster that shot out electricity, and he had a jetpack, but looked like a normal stormtrooper, but with like black shiny armor or whatever.
Oh, the Shadow Trooper.
The Shadow Trooper. Okay,
Yeah,
I don't know. I thought
in the game, Trooper. In Battlefront 2, the original one, they were called Dark Troopers, but in the novels and stuff, I think they were Shadow Troopers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's very convoluted. And Dark Troopers were like completely droids. There weren't humans at all.
Yeah.
And
Dark Troopers were there was three phases of the Dark Trooper. So the phase 1 was completely unmanned. It was fully robotic. The second phase was more or less what we see as far as the costume goes in this show. They had an ability to have a person inside the suit, and it was kind of like a mech suit, and it was able to it was sealed and had the oxygen tanks and everything like that, and heavy weaponized. And then the phase 3 were just like tank suits, like those were like Hulkbuster level size things.
So this is where I kind of want to take a stab a little bit. Like I got mad Warhammer Space Marine vibes off of those.
Yeah, they totally are. Very much so.
Like you talking about Phase 3. I was like, someone was reading or like, playing a little bit of Warhammer 40k and was like, hey man, let's cross over a little bit of this Space Marine goodness to Star Wars and see how that works out.
Yeah, I could see that. Actually, if they were suits, that'd be pretty cool instead of just droids.
Yeah, I think that would be
the phase 2 and 3 are suits, and it looks to me as if this is Dark Troopers, that they would be in the phase 2 or 3, and maybe in canon now they're skipping the whole phase thing altogether and just going for Dark Trooper.
Yeah, maybe.
Which I can get on board with that too. But they did show up in a book called the Imperial Handbook, which is behind me. You guys are on the video with me, so you can see I got the Jedi Order book over here, and I've got the Sith, the Book of Sith in that corner over there in the case. So they came up with
all disciplines.
Oh yeah, dude, it's the display, man. It's the display. So there was two others.
Josh, you need a Rebel like Alliance pilot helmet and the
dude,
the Stormtrooper.
Yeah, the thing. I'll get into that helmet later, but so the. They released a few others. There was a bounty hunter one, there was a rebel one, and there was an imperial one. The imperial one was published around the same time that the canon Legends thing was a big deal, and they were kind of branding all expanded universe as Legends. So this book is actually considered Legends, but the Dark Trooper did show up in that and referenced, of course, their appearances in the eras that I guess they showed in. But the concept, I guess, has always been there to have this kind of mech suit for an Imperial Stormtrooper, and it's always been called a Dark Trooper. And generally speaking, they show up around this sort of time in the timeline.
Oh, really?
And I actually have I believe so, yeah. And I actually have a Star Wars miniature, because I have like 300 or 200 something or another of these Star Wars miniature game pieces from Wizards of the Coast game, Star Wars miniatures. And I have a Phase 2 Dark Trooper miniature, and it's about twice as tall as a normal guy. So as a sense of scale, that's generally sort of how big they are.
To what we see,
Yeah, it is generally pretty accurate to what we see. And that's why so many people are like, yeah, these are Dark Troopers, and freaking out about it, because they're a big deal. So.
That's pretty cool. Hopefully it is that. I'd rather them do that than bring in something else entirely different when they had something like this at their disposal.
Yeah, exactly. So before I talk about the helmet thing, was there anything either of you guys had written down and wanted to bring up that I may have missed or didn't cover?
Yeah, there's one thing. I wanted to briefly chat about that medal that the X-Wing pilot kind of drops off to Cara Dune. If it is a medal, because I know we talked about that briefly when we were watching it. Mm-hmm. But it seems weird to me that he would just have this medal on him, that just hand her. So I think it's more likely that, because he was trying to recruit her. So I wonder if maybe that's like a recruitment card or something for the rebels.
Well, so my thought that I had kind of mentioned to you guys earlier too was that, so we remember from Rise of Skywalker, like when they're trying to get off that planet that I don't remember the name of, and maybe was the name was never given to us. I don't know, but like the kind of wintry one or whatever, where like the stormtroopers are going full Nazis, like Night of the Long Knives and kicking down doors and stuff like that. And the
Yeah.
like their criminal smuggler friend, like when they do get off, she gives him like I can't remember what it was specifically. I think it's like a captain's medallion or something like that.
Yeah,
Is that what it was?
they needed to break into or to get onto the ship
Break
or
through
whatever.
yeah, something like that to get off world.
Yeah,
Like to get passage basically. And so that's kind of what I thought that medallion could be, because yeah, it seemed really odd to me too that he would just have like this obnoxiously large medal like hanging around with him while he's on duty, like on patrol and stuff like that. So I was kind of like, oh, maybe this is kind of like
it's like a clearance pass, right?
yeah, it's kind of like their well, I guess he's not Alliance or Rebel Alliance anymore, but this is kind of their equivalent of like what that captain's medallion would be, because I guess
Yeah, I can see that. So he gave her like a clearance pass, so if she changes her mind about being recruited, she can get in without being shot down.
Yeah, or like yeah, it's maybe it would work the same way that like the captain's medallion did, where it's like gives them like safe passage or like a call in a favor type of deal. I don't know. So, but yeah, that was kind of my speculation, but who knows? Maybe it is just a giant chunk of metal that like.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. That's a good point.
Yeah, because like the fact that they actually took the time to have him try to recruit her, like, oh, we could use soldiers like you. She's like, nah, I'm not interested. That's got to be foreshadowing for something.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I wonder if they're gonna slowly have maybe just her, but maybe also Mando start to work more with the New Republic.
So that was the other thing I was going to mention, is that because he also talks about how like, oh, there's a pattern here. There's something going on that no one's paying attention to, and the New Republic's not paying attention to, and stuff like that. We need to work together to like figure this thing out and deal with it before it becomes like too much for us to handle. So I definitely think like we're going to see more, because I mean we're seeing more and more Empire too, and not just like the trash like bummed out stormtroopers that we saw from the start of the first season and stuff like that. We're starting to see like the crack, like frontline, like crisp new uniformed stormtroopers and stuff like that, like more and more often. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more like New Republic stuff, like more and more often, or at least more of these guys for sure.
I certainly hope so, because they make it very clear in the sequel films that the New Republic is a demilitarized government. So what's left of the rebellion is currently acting like a police force, trying to keep everything together.
Yeah.
And I like that they've acknowledged the fact that a lot of people in the rebellion who've now become part of the New Republic, they're like, hey, we got our office back. Boom, fight's over. And they don't care anymore about what happens in the Outer Rim. They're like, hey, we got the core back. That's all that matters for now. Let's not worry about what's going on out there. And what's his face? I don't even know his character's name. He's like one of these more sensible guys that's out there seeing this stuff, and he's like, Kate, there's been patterns of these outlying Imperial bases and whatever showing up here and there, and quite frankly, like, I'm getting concerned because nobody in the inner rim or in the core worlds really knows or cares about any of this stuff. And every time I report back to give them the news and tell them but it was taken care of, they're probably just like, well, whatever, just keep on the patrolling, try and find something worth the New Republic's time of day.
Like I'm sure like the New Republic's got plenty it's already preoccupied with, like within the New Republic, considering that they're kind of like, man, we don't really need much of a military anymore, even though like we're barely holding on to what we have.
It's ironic that they would want to do that immediately after fighting this giant war machine of an empire, not thinking that anything else could possibly come up against them.
Yeah,
exactly. Like they think they've already won. Obviously they're wrong, because there's this fledgling threat out there that they tend to not acknowledge up until like the very last second, and then they all get blown away.
Yeah.
Well, and
So-
I think an interesting thing too to like appreciate the scope of like the Galactic Civil War. So like that guy, I can't remember what his character's name is, the X-wing pilot, but he's like oh, like he, you know, when he's talking to the gal, the marshal, he's like, oh yeah, like, you know, I was in service, like I was serving like when Alderaan was destroyed and stuff like that, which like
Yeah.
happened a really long time ago, like in the
At
scope
this
of, like,
point,
the
yeah, it
era.
would have been.
Yeah, and so for him to like still be like going out and around, like, because they're strapped so thin that he's like, I still need to like be here, like flying around, like trying to deal with stuff like that. Like to me, that's crazy. So it's like, I guess like when I think about like the New Republic demilitarizing, I'm like, man, this has gone on for a really long time, and it's really hard to keep up like enthusiasm, like
Yeah.
fighting the Empire and stuff like that for that long. So it's only like kind of the
I mean, because it's
few
been,
left.
you're right, and it's been 4 years since the Battle of Jakku, which was a year after the Battle of Endor in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And the Battle of Jakku is supposed to
Be the
be
end. Yeah.
the end, right? Yeah, like that's supposed to be the end game essentially for the Empire. In fact, in Chuck Wendig's trilogy of Aftermath novels, the third one is called Empire's End.
Yeah.
And it completely it refers to the fact that this giant plot over the contingency plan that also plays a place in the Battlefront 2 campaign all kind of comes to a close in this last final story, and the Empire kind of lures the New Republic / the Rebellion, I guess, into this battle above Jakku, and the whole plan that Palpatine has in place is to basically just blow up the planet and sacrifice his fleet to kill every single Rebellion / New Republic ship out there, and kind of start clean, start fresh, and he's got a group of people that will act as a leader force to rebuild on a clean slate, which would then be the First Order, right? But that plan actually fails, and Jakku doesn't blow up, and as a result, there's scars of this massive battle that happened all over Jakku. So you see all these ships that have like sunken into the sand 30 years later, which Rhea's, scavenging around in and stuff like that. So it was a really cool build-up moment, and of course, this show taking place 4 years after that battle, the New Republic is like, there's nothing out there. Like we beat the enemy already. Like we're done. Like not only is the Empire completely gone, but the Emperor's dead, Darth Vader's dead, the Death Stars are all gone. Like what more is there to worry
Still,
about?
you think they want some sort of force just for policing? I mean, we saw even in the prequel era, they were constantly fighting like pirates and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly where the Jedi Order comes into play, right? Is that they are the guardians of peace and justice in the Republic, right? And the book Master and Apprentice does a good job at recreating the spirit that I think a lot of us, as in our younger years, maybe have read. One of my favorite book series, at least, was the Jedi Apprentice and the Jedi Quest books. Did either of you guys read those way back when, the Scholastic?
Yeah, I'd say the Scholastic ones. I never did because I was just a little bit too old for them. They were coming out at kind of gauged for like the age, maybe like 3 or 4 years younger than me. So I never did, but I remember seeing them when they came out.
Yeah, so a lot of them were coming out around the same time that Attack of the Clones was coming out. The Jedi Apprentice film, the books came out around the same time as The Phantom Menace, around 1999 to 2001. And then the final series, which was called Fate of the Jedi, came out around 2005 and ended around 2008, I think it was.
Okay, I think it's those ones I was thinking of.
Yeah, so that's the last series that they did, which is 10 books. But the series before that, which was called Jedi Quest, was about Anakin and Obi-Wan. And then the series before that was about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And both these series were really well establishing this relationship between Master and Apprentice, and did a great job at showing how the Jedi act on other planets, doing missions that aren't war-related. Because if you think about it, the Clone Wars and the prequels, they do a great job at showing us how capable the Jedi are at leading an army, but that's not what they're supposed to do. And that's the whole purpose as to why Yoda says, you know, we've failed, because they went out and did something that they never stood for in the first place. Like, they weren't supposed to take up arms against anybody because they're peacekeepers. You know, they're peacekeepers leading a war. They're hypocrites, right? And so that's why I love the prequel so much, because they do such a great job at bringing in all these like different things that makes you think. But in a time in which Obi-Wan to Luke really gives him that golden age feeling of like, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the old Republic, you know, before the dark times, before the Empire, you know, before everything. And that's like the real sort of Jedi that we need to see and that we haven't seen very much of. Like, that's the Luke Skywalker sort of Jedi that we want to see in this time. And around this time, I think is the perfect time to have a person like that. So, I mean, that goes into my next thing. Is like, I would love a TV show about young Luke Skywalker trying to rebuild the Jedi Order and all that stuff. That would be fantastic.
That would be very interesting. Would you want that to be animated or live action?
I wouldn't care. I mean, honestly, if it was live action, I hope
the problem
that we would
is
get.
You'd have to recast Mark Hamill if it was live action, right?
That's the only thing. Yeah. So I mean, animated, I'd be down for animated. At that level in Battlefront 2, that was pretty good though. I really liked playing as Luke for that brief moment.
That was so cool. Yeah. Honestly, if they did a video game about it too, that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And he was out looking at one of the Emperor's sort of like outlying bases or whatever. What did he call it again?
Oh yeah, I can't remember. It was like a vault or something.
Yeah, it was like a vault, and there was a name for it as well.
Observatory.
Yeah, observatory. Thank you. Yeah. So this is actually something that popped up in the Aftermath books as well. Was the fact that the Emperor's got all these observatories all over the place, but.
Right, because he was looking into Beyond the Outer Rim.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, as Luke Skywalker in this level, you take out one of his observatories, and he finds this compass in this observatory, which ends up being the compass that he has in The Last Jedi, sitting on a shelf, which plays no role in the story, but it was just a nice little cameo. Yeah, it was a nice little cameo there, but. I was like, wow, that's so cool that they acknowledge the fact that Luke is out there. You know, he's kind of separated himself away from this rebellion, that he has now accomplished a huge goal. I mean, and for him, you know, taking up arms against the Empire became a very personal thing once he realized that Vader was his father. It then became a personal sort of, you know, I'm out there to redeem or fight my father and become a Jedi, right? Like, that's his only goal, his only objective. And that's why in Return of the Jedi and in Empire Strikes Back, he's always leaving the rebellion. He's always just ditching, because like, he's off to accomplish something that nobody else has this responsibility to do, right? And I've always wanted a TV show or just more about that Luke Skywalker in canon, because there's been a lot about that in the EU, but in canon we've got hardly anything.
Which is funny, because in the original expanded universe, immediately after Return of the Jedi, Luke, as we find him, is going planet to planet and just trying to like stop disputes, like the Jedi of old. Is exactly what he was doing. And then they end up, you know, meeting Thrawn and doing that whole thing. But
yeah, totally. Well, we've run pretty long now, so I guess we should probably wrap up. Is there anything you guys wanted to talk about really quickly?
I think that was pretty good.
Yeah, we covered all my notes.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, I guess we'll catch you guys next week.
Cool. Thanks for having me, man. It's a lot of fun.
All right, everybody, thanks again for tuning in to Star Wars Escape Pod, and we hope you enjoyed the show. One thing I forgot to bring up, actually, today was the helmet thing. So basically, I just went to the store and saw the X-Wing helmet, the Black Series, you know, scaled replica, and I wasn't too impressed with the paint job on it, the weathering, not my favorite. So I actually had to... It was a sad pass on that one, but I went for the Vader helmet instead. which is pretty good. But anyway, enough said about that. We'll see you guys next week for the next episode. Of course, we got episode 5 around the corner, The Mandalorian. The episode is called The Jedi, so obviously this is going to be the episode to bring in Ahsoka from Star Wars: The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. I've been waiting for this for years to see a live-action version of this character. Still a little upset that they didn't cash Ashley Eckstein for the character this time around for live action, but you know, I'm speaking a little too soon. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I mean, we got multiple ways that you can reach out to the show. theescape@outlook.com, and our Twitter feed is at SWEscape Podcast. So you can get daily updates and just a better one-on-one sort of communication through that platform. We also got our Discord and multiple other ways to drop a voicemail in the description at our SpeakPipe address. And if you guys could rate a 5-star and share with your friends, that would be fantastic and help us out a lot. So feel free to reach out, and looking forward to hearing from you if you do. We'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you.